It was my birthday, and I'd taken the week off work. I didn't have any big plans, just wanted to get out of the city for a few days, clear my head somewhere quiet. I found a deal online for this place called the Ocean Breeze in Santa Barbara. Small hotel, right near the beach. Walk-in distance to the water. The pictures looked nice enough. I figured why not. When I checked in, the guy at the front desk was friendly. Maybe too friendly. That sort of fake professional politeness that feels rehearsed. He handed me the key card and said, "Room 405 Ocean View. You'll love it." The room was actually really nice. Corner unit, fourth floor, with a balcony that looked right over the Pacific. I unpacked a little, changed into shorts, and spent most of that first day just on the beach doing nothing. I hadn't realized how much I needed that until then. When the sun started to go down, I headed back, showered, and got ready to go grab dinner. Nothing weird yet. Everything was fine. By the time I got back from dinner, it was already dark. I sat out on the balcony for a bit, listening to the waves, watching the lights along the pier. I didn't even feel tired, but after a while I just went to bed. Around 11 maybe. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to what sounded like someone crying. Not loud, just soft, muffled sobbing. At first, I thought maybe it was someone in the next room. These walls didn't look that thick. But then I realized it wasn't coming from next door. It was coming from inside my room. Specifically, the bathroom. The sound was faint, but clear enough that I could tell it was a woman. I sat up in bed, trying to make sense of it, and for a few seconds I just listened, hoping it would stop. It didn't. I got up slowly and walked toward the bathroom. The door was closed, but I could see a light coming from underneath. Not the yellowish light from the bulb I'd left off earlier, but something different. It was this dull, greenish glow. I don't know how else to describe it. I hesitated, then pushed the door open a few inches. The sound stopped instantly. The mirror was lit up with that faint glow, like there was something behind it, but nothing was there. I shut the door hard and the light went out. The silence afterward was heavier than the noise had been. I stood there a second, trying to convince myself I'd just imagined it. Maybe a reflection from outside, maybe the plumbing, anything that made sense. I went back to bed and laid there, but the whole room suddenly felt colder. I couldn't shake it. My heart wouldn't slow down. I told myself not to overreact. I was tired, that's all. I turned on the TV for background noise, muted, just to feel less alone. The clock said 2:41 a.m. I must have been staring at the ceiling for at least an hour before it happened again. A loud bang came from the wall behind the bed, sharp, solid, like someone hit it with their fist. I froze. Then it came again, closer, like it was right against the headboard. I sat up fast, pulling the blanket off me, and then I felt it a cold hand wrapping around my ankle. It wasn't soft or gentle, it was firm, cold, fingers pressing into my skin. I screamed before I could stop myself, kicking hard until I felt it let go. I jumped off the bed, heart hammering, and backed away toward the door. I didn't even think I just needed to get out. I yanked the door open, ran into the hallway barefoot, and didn't stop until I saw the light from the front desk. The guy who checked me in looked startled when he saw me sprinting toward him, out of breath, still in my t-shirt and boxers. I must have looked insane. I tried to explain something in the room. Someone grabbed me, but the words were coming out shaky and jumbled. He said, "Sir, calm down. There's nobody up there but you." I told him again, louder this time, that there was someone in the room. I wasn't asking, I was telling him. He hesitated for a moment, then grabbed a flashlight from under the counter and motioned for me to follow him. I didn't want to go back up there, but I also didn't want to stand alone in the lobby. We took the elevator up, the ride feeling way too slow. When the doors opened, everything was silent. My door was still open, light spilling into the hallway. The front desk guy went in first, calling out, "Hotel staff!" No answer. He walked around, checked the bathroom, even opened the closet. Nothing. I stayed by the door, watching him check under the bed. He stood up and shook his head. "Nobody here," he said, but his voice sounded unsure. I noticed the blanket I'd kicked off earlier was bunched on the floor. My ankles still felt cold where I'd been grabbed. He asked if I wanted another room. I said yes. Anything but that one. We went back downstairs, and he gave me a new keycard without saying much else. I ended up sitting in the lobby until sunrise, too shaken to sleep. I told the night clerk what happened, and she just stared at me with this completely blank expression. It was a different person than the guy from before, an older woman with short grey hair, glasses, and a badge that said Marta. I was still shaking when I said, "There's something wrong with that room." She didn't even blink. I told her about the crying, the light, the hand everything, and she just kept that same neutral face, like she'd heard it all before, but was pretending she hadn't. I asked her if anyone else had ever complained about strange things happening in room 405. She hesitated for half a second before saying, "No, sir, you're the first." But the way she said it didn't sit right with me. Her tone was too flat, too rehearsed, like she'd practiced it. I stared at her for a few seconds, waiting for her to break, but she didn't. "I want a different room," I said. She sighed, glanced at the computer, then at me again. "We're almost full tonight, but I can move you to 305. I didn't care where it was, I just wanted out of that corner room. She handed me the key card like it weighed a ton. I could tell she didn't want to, but she wasn't going to argue. I went back up with her key, still half expecting to see someone waiting in the hallway. Everything looked normal, calm, quiet, just the hum of the air conditioner. My suitcase was still in 405, right by the door where I'd dropped it earlier. I didn't even turn the lights back on. I just grabbed my stuff as fast as I could and left. When I turned to lock the door, I noticed something strange. The door frame had a long scratch in the wood, like someone had dragged something metal down it. It wasn't there before. I froze for a second, staring at it, then forced myself to leave. Room 305 was smaller, with a view of the parking lot instead of the ocean, but I didn't care. I made sure the door was locked, turned on every light, and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't even change clothes. I just sat there until my breathing slowed down. Every creak in the hallway made me flinch. At one point, around 4 a.m., I thought I heard footsteps outside my door, slow ones, shuffling past, stopping for a few seconds, then continuing down the hall. I didn't check. I couldn't. I just sat there, gripping the remote, staring at the door until the sound faded. When the sky started getting light through the blinds, I finally let myself relax a little. I must have drifted off for a short while, because when I opened my eyes again, the sun was already up. I packed what little I had unpacked, made a quick cup of coffee from the machine by the bathroom, and went downstairs to check out. The night clerk was gone. At the front desk there was a new guy, probably in his 50s, wearing a name tag that said Ray. I asked if he was the manager, and he said yes. He looked more approachable than the others, so I told him everything about the crying, the light, the cold hand, even about the clerk lying to me. He listened quietly, nodding every so often, and when I finished, he took a deep breath and said, "You were in 405, weren't you?" That's when I knew he believed me. He leaned closer and lowered his voice. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," he said, "but that room's got history." I asked what he meant, and he said a woman had committed suicide there a few years back. He didn't sugarcoat it. She was staying here with her boyfriend. He left her for someone else, and she hanged herself in the bathroom. It's been a problem ever since. I didn't say anything. I just stared at him. He told me guests had complained before crying, lights flickering, the sound of water running when nobody was inside. "We've had the room blessed, repainted, even changed the furniture," he said. "Nothing helps. We just stopped renting it out most nights, but the summer's busy, so—" He trailed off. I could tell he felt guilty about it. I didn't even bother asking for a refund. I just said, "I'm checking out." He didn't argue. As I walked toward the door, he called after me, "You're not the first person who's left early because of that room." I didn't look back. I just kept walking, suitcase in hand, straight out to my car. I sat there for a long minute before starting the engine, staring at the hotel's sign in the rearview mirror. Ocean breeze. It looked so ordinary in daylight, almost harmless. I drove away and never went back. So this story is from a couple of years ago, and it happened in the summer of 2018. My then girlfriend, now wife, and I were looking for a place to stay the night, but we couldn't go back to our respective apartments because her roommate was home, and my brother was home too. So we found a motel on the outskirts of our little city that advertised itself as a 24-hour place, with rooms being rented out by the hour. We didn't need it for more than about 6 hours, so it was perfect. It was one of those single-floor roadside motels with big numbers painted on the doors. The sign flickered a bit, but the parking lot was empty, so we figured we'd get privacy at least. The lady at the front desk didn't even look up when we came in, just slid a key across the counter and said, "Room 12. We got to the room, and it was a bit older and dated, but otherwise in surprisingly good condition for what it was. Beige carpet, heavy floral curtains, the usual. I remember there was this faint smell of cleaning solution, like they'd just scrubbed it down. The air conditioner was rattling like it had been running for years, but it worked, so we didn't complain. We got settled in, watched TV for a bit, and then turned off the lights. I remember thinking how quiet it was for being right off the highway. After a while, the hum of the AC started to fade into white noise, and we both dozed off. Sometime later, I woke up. I don't know what time it was, maybe 3 in the morning. I wasn't sure why I woke up, either just that I felt weirdly alert, like something small had shifted in the air. I got up, went to the bathroom, splashed some water on my face, then came back out. My girlfriend was giggling softly. I asked her what was so funny, and she just pointed at the wall beside the bed. At first, I didn't see anything. The wallpaper was just this pale yellow colour, with little cracks here and there. But then I looked closer, and there it was, some kind of childish drawing, faint like someone had used a pencil and then rubbed it with their finger. It was a stick figure, wearing what looked like a triangle-shaped hat, standing next to a badly drawn house. I laughed, figuring it was some previous guest's attempt at being cute or edgy. "Guess someone got bored," I said. She laughed too, said it looked like something a kid would do. We didn't think much of it. Later, while we were lying there scrolling on our phones, I looked back at the wall again. I don't know why, maybe just out of habit, or maybe because I felt something off. The drawing looked a little different. I couldn't say how exactly, just that something about it wasn't quite the same. I even stood up and leaned closer, thinking the light might have changed it somehow. The lines looked darker than before, like they had been retraced. I asked her if she noticed anything weird, but she said it looked the same to her. I figured I was just tired. The next morning, sunlight was coming through the blinds when I opened my eyes. The drawing was still there, but now it definitely looked different. There was something added, something I hadn't noticed before. I sat up, squinting at it. "Did you draw a second stick figure on the wall?" I asked. She looked at me like I was nuts. "No, why would I do that?" I pointed at it. There were 2 figures now. The first one, with the triangle hat, was still standing next to the little house. But now there was another one beside it, wearing a circle-shaped hat. I just stared at it for a long time, because I knew for a fact that it hadn't been there the night before. My girlfriend got up, came over, and frowned. "That's creepy," she said. She even ran her hand over the wall, like she was checking if it was a sticker or something, but it was just part of the surface, drawn or etched in somehow. We both stood there for a bit, neither of us saying anything. The motel was dead quiet outside, no traffic sounds, nothing. She broke the silence first. "Wait," she said. "I remember reading about this place. Didn't some guy murder his girlfriend here a couple of years ago?" I blinked, trying to remember if that was true. I vaguely recalled hearing something like that in the news, some domestic thing, in a motel just off the highway. I don't know, I said, though my stomach felt heavy now. Maybe? She nodded, arms crossed. Yeah, I swear it was this one. I think they found her in one of the rooms. The air in the room suddenly felt thick. I went over to the window, pulled the curtain aside, and looked out at the parking lot. Empty. Just our car, sitting there in the sunlight. I told her we should just pack up and go soon. She agreed, said she'd shower first. While she was in the bathroom, I looked at the wall again. Both stick figures were there, same as before, but I noticed something else this time. One of the figures' heads had a small line coming down from it, connecting to the roof of the house, like it was hanging. I didn't say anything when she came out. We grabbed our stuff, checked out quickly, and left without mentioning the drawing to anyone. The clerk didn't look up that time either, just took the key and went back to whatever she was doing. We got in the car and didn't talk for most of the drive. When we passed the motel sign in the rearview mirror, I finally said, "Let's not ever stay there again." She nodded without looking up from her phone. That was it. We never talked about that wall again. I kept looking at the drawing, and now it was a third stick figure, and this one was wearing a square-shaped hat. I was completely spooked, and my girlfriend was already halfway out the door. I told her to wait a second, and I went back to the wall, and now it was a fourth stick figure, and this one was wearing a star-shaped hat, and it was holding a rope. My heart was pounding, and I grabbed my girlfriend's hand, and we both ran for the door. She kept saying, "Let's just go, let's just go," her voice shaking. I didn't argue. I shoved the keycard in my pocket and pulled the door open, but something made me turn back one last time. The room looked normal again, like any other cheap motel room. Sunlight spilling through the blinds, carpet worn out, bed unmade, but that wall, it almost seemed to be breathing, like the air above it was rippling slightly. I blinked hard, and it stopped. I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but I didn't really believe that. We walked fast across the parking lot, not running, but close. She kept glancing over her shoulder, and I was doing the same, expecting maybe to see someone come out of the room after us. But no one did. The entire place looked deserted, even the front office. The vacancy sign buzzed and flickered in the daylight, and that faint chemical smell from earlier seemed to follow us outside, clinging to our clothes. Once we got in the car, she turned the key immediately. The engine stuttered before starting, which made both of us tense up even more. When it finally caught, she said, "We're never staying in a place like that again." Her voice quiet, almost like she didn't want the motel to hear her. I agreed right away, but as we started driving off, I couldn't stop myself from checking the mirror. Room 12 was still visible from the lot, just a dark rectangle of a doorway now. For a second, I thought I saw something like a faint outline of someone standing inside, barely visible through the gap in the curtains. It could have been a shadow, or maybe the way the light hit the wall, but it looked like a figure wearing that stupid triangle-shaped hat. I didn't say anything to her. I just told her to keep driving. We stopped at a diner about 20 minutes away, mostly just to get our bearings. She went to the bathroom while I sat in the booth, hands still trembling. The waitress asked if I was okay, and I said yeah, just a long night. When my girlfriend came back, she looked pale, still rattled. "There was a drawing in the bathroom," she said quietly, not sitting down yet. "By the sink. Same stick figures." I didn't even want to check. I told her we were leaving right then. We paid for our untouched coffees and got back on the highway. The drive home was completely silent. Every billboard, every building we passed, I caught myself scanning for those shapes. When we got to the door, I took one last look at the wall, and the drawing had changed again. Now there was only one stick figure, and it was the first one, the one with the triangle hat, but now it was hanging from the ceiling by the rope. I didn't stick around to see if it changed again. We got in the car, and we drove to her apartment, and we never went back to that motel. We never talked about it again, and I still don't know what it was. But I do know one thing. It was terrifying, and it's the reason why I don't stay in cheap motels anymore. Sometimes when we travel now, she always books the room. I don't even look at the walls. I can't. Every time I see an old motel sign, or a faded wallpaper pattern, my stomach knots up. And even now, years later, I still dream about that wall, those stick figures standing there, waiting for someone else to check in. My name is Dinesh, and I was born in Sri Lanka, but I've been living and working in Mumbai, India for the last 20 years. She's 14 years old now, and although we have a fairly good relationship, there have been times when we've gone through some strain. Now, for example, when she was 12, she got into a habit of slamming her bedroom door whenever she was angry with school or her friends or what have you. But she doesn't understand because there's something she doesn't know, and it concerns something that happened to me just a few years before she was born. Something that resulted in me suffering from a very prolonged and very acute post-traumatic stress disorder. I used to be employed as a floor supervisor at the Taj Mahal Hotel here in Mumbai, and I first got the job in early 2008 when I was still just the tender age of 24 years old. It was my dream job. The Taj was the most prestigious place to work in the city, and when I was hired, I remember calling my mother that same night, crying out of happiness. Everything was perfect back then. I had a fiancée, Priya. We were planning to get married the following year. I was young, optimistic, proud to wear my uniform every morning, but that changed in ways I never could have imagined. Just under a year into working there, I thought I could see myself working here for a long time, but then one night, everything changed. It was around 9:30 p.m. when it started. The hotel was bustling with guests and staff, and we were all very busy, and it was business as usual. Then suddenly we heard what sounded like firecrackers coming from the lobby downstairs, but our confusion turned to pure terror when we realized it wasn't firecrackers. It was gunfire, and our terror only intensified as the sounds drew closer. These terrorists were members of a group who called themselves Lashkar-e-Taiba, a Pakistani-based militant group, and after forcing their way through the main entrance of the hotel, they began firing indiscriminately. The sounds of people screaming, glass breaking, and the echo of automatic rifles are things I can still hear when I close my eyes. I remember ducking behind the reception counter with two other employees, while one of them, a kid barely 20, was whispering the name of his mother over and over. We didn't understand what was happening, not yet. Someone said they saw men throwing grenades in the lobby, and that's when I knew it was no ordinary attack. We all scrambled, trying to get guests to safety. I remember yelling for people to stay down, to get behind anything they could. The elevators stopped working minutes later, the lights flickered, and the sound of explosions just kept getting closer. I found a couple of British guests frozen near the concierge desk, too scared to move. I told them to follow me through the staff hallway, and that's when we heard the unmistakable footsteps of men running in our direction, shouting in Urdu. I'll never forget that moment, the absolute certainty that death was around the corner. And I went back into the hotel's corridors to help guests find a way through the staff corridors and away from the gunfire. You see, the terrorists were not just shooting randomly, they were systematically moving through the hotel, searching for foreigners. I could hear them shouting in Urdu, demanding to know where foreign guests were staying, particularly British and Americans. They seemed to be moving from room to room on the lower floors, breaking into guest rooms in the restaurant areas, and then setting the place on fire in the hopes the entire hotel might burn down. I heard them in the Wasabi by Morimoto. It's the upscale Japanese restaurant where they had taken hostages, forcing guests to the ground and shooting some if they moved or didn't comply. I could hear people crying, glass breaking, and then silence followed by more gunfire. The smell of smoke began to fill the air, and it was getting harder to breathe. I remember seeing two other hotel workers crawling under a service trolley, motioning for me to come, but I couldn't. There was a family trapped in the stairwell, an older couple with their teenage son, and I couldn't just leave them. I helped them through the kitchen area, which by then was filling with smoke, and out toward the back exit where police were trying to gain control. Every few seconds, we'd duck down as bullets hit walls behind us. I thought that was it for me more than once that night. Every door slamming, every burst of gunfire felt like the end. I managed to get them out, but I couldn't leave yet. People were still inside. I went back in. At one point, this was perhaps the most chilling moment for me personally. The terrorists used the hotel's internal communication systems, or the PA, to taunt and threaten us. They said all Hindus were allowed to leave the building as long as they told the terrorists where any Western guests were hiding. Hearing that over the intercom made my blood run cold. It wasn't just random violence anymore. It was targeted, planned, meant to divide us. Some guests looked at me, terrified, like they were wondering if I'd take that deal. I didn't even respond. I just told them quietly, "Stay down, don't move." There were people sobbing under tables, whispering prayers. One of the chefs, a Sikh man I knew named Rajdeep, was trying to stop a bleeding guest with a torn napkin. He looked at me, his face covered in soot and sweat, and said, "They want to burn us alive." He wasn't exaggerating. The heat was rising, the smoke getting thicker, and the crackling of fire mixed with the sound of gunfire made it hard to think. I don't remember how long we stayed in that corridor. Time stopped being real. Every sound felt like it lasted hours. At some point, we heard gunshots from another direction closer, heavier. I didn't know if it was more terrorists or someone trying to fight back. Then, faintly at first, we began to hear shouting, different voices, more organized. The Indian security forces had arrived. I can't describe the sound of hope that came with those first gunshots that weren't meant for us. It was chaos still, but at least it was a kind of chaos that meant rescue might be coming. I crawled out of the staff corridor with 2 other employees and guided a group of guests toward a laundry chute that led to a lower floor. We had to move through the smoke, covering our mouths with towels soaked in spilled water bottles. One of the British guests, an older man named Peter, kept thanking me under his breath, even as his hands shook uncontrollably. I told him not to speak, not to make noise. The shooting continued for what felt like forever. Sometimes it got quiet, and we'd start to hope it was over, only for another round to explode somewhere nearby. The air was thick with gunpowder and burning carpet. When the shooting had finally stopped, we heard men speaking Hindi and English, telling us to come out and that they were the police, and the relief that we felt was monumental, a feeling I will never forget. They led us out through the service area, stepping over broken glass and bullet shells. When I finally saw the night sky outside the hotel, I almost fell to my knees. The air smelled like smoke and sea salt, and even though it was filled with sirens and shouting, it felt like freedom. The once grand Taj was now a mess of bullet holes and blood and broken glass. The aftermath was a blur of helping where I could, guiding dazed guests to safety, and basically anything I could to delay my own emotional reaction. That was my way of dealing with it, being selfless, completely forgetting myself, because when I remembered it all, when I allowed myself to process what had happened to me, it was just too devastating. I stayed at the hotel for 2 days after the attack, helping police identify staff, checking rooms for survivors, helping carry bodies out. There were faces I'll never forget, people I'd served coffee to, people I'd laughed with on slow nights, gone. The corridors that once smelled of perfume and polish now stank of smoke and blood. When I finally went home, I didn't sleep for weeks. Every loud sound made me jump. Every slammed door felt like another gunshot. I couldn't step into a hotel lobby for almost 2 years after that. I left my job quietly, without even saying goodbye to most people. Priya stayed with me for a while, but it was hard on her too. I wasn't myself. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced I was back there, hearing the PA, the shouting, the screams. Even years later, I still flinch when I hear sudden loud noises, and so maybe after this she will understand why I got so angry when she slammed the door. It wasn't anger that she was seeing, it was fear, because that noise took me right back to the Taj on what I thought would be my last night on Earth. My granddaddy was a Texas Ranger back during the Great Depression. He passed when I was just a kid, so most of what I know came from my dad's stories. Cochran County back then was like the Wild West all over again. Every other week, a bank or credit union was getting hit. Morton, Whiteface, Bledsoe. Those names came up a lot. People were desperate, sure, but some of those guys weren't robbing banks out of need. They were doing it because they could. Anyway, One of Granddaddy's tips came from a guy swearing up and down he'd seen a getaway car parked outside this little roadside place called the Yellow Rose Motel. Supposedly just an old mom and pop stopover in the middle of nowhere. Granddaddy drives out there, long stretch of dust road and nothing but scrubland on either side. The owners turn out to be this sweet old couple, looked like they hadn't seen another soul in a week. The man was soft-spoken, the woman wore an apron even though they didn't serve food anymore. They told him no such man had checked in, and if his car had been seen in their lot, well, maybe he stopped to rest, but nobody came through the front desk. They were polite, maybe too polite. Granddaddy thanked them, told them to start keeping a log of guests, then drove off. Nothing suspicious on paper, but he told my dad later something about that place just didn't sit right. Said it was too quiet, too clean for somewhere supposedly forgotten. A few months go by. Granddaddy and his partner are working another case, different bank, different robbers. Out of nowhere, the name Yellow Rose Motel pops up again. This time, it's from a guest claiming to have seen one of Granddaddy's suspects walking into a room carrying a bag, same kind used in a liquor store hold-up nearby. They ride back out there, same couple greets them, same smiles, same handshakes, same story. No records, no recollection. They looked at the photo, acted like maybe they remembered him, but not sure. My granddaddy left frustrated, said if it weren't for how old and friendly they were, he'd have pressed harder. Months pass again, new case, and damned if the Yellow Rose doesn't come up for a third time. Now a different witness claims to have spoken to a robbery suspect who supposedly stayed there, but when rangers questioned him further, he slipped up. First, he acted confused, said he didn't know who they meant. Then Granddaddy asked if he'd been in the man's room, maybe got a better look. The guy lied, said no, but his partner could tell. He was covering for something. When they pressed him again, he shut down completely, said he didn't want any trouble. That was the first real sign something deeper was going on. Granddaddy didn't know how yet, but the Yellow Rose kept pulling people into its orbit. Granddaddy's partner thought he had it figured out. The old couple was sheltering robbers, maybe taking a cut of their loot in exchange for hiding them. Made sense on paper, but it didn't explain how nobody ever found those men again. Rangers waited months before hearing another whisper about that motel. Then one afternoon, Granddaddy gets a call from a different agency they'd caught some bandito out near Lubbock. Guy was already in custody, willing to talk. He tells Granddaddy and his partner about a safe house west of Morton called the Yellow Rose, where crooks could lay low or even disappear, as long as they paid a percentage. He said he and his partners were planning to head there before he got caught. But when Granddaddy asked him what happened to those who did make it there, how they managed to stay gone, the prisoner swore he didn't know. They never come back out, he said, but maybe that's the point. Granddaddy left that interrogation convinced there was something more to it. If the couple were just fencing stolen goods or running a hideout, there'd be tracks, money trails, informants, bodies turning up somewhere, but there was nothing, not a trace. Rangers combed through the county records, old missing person reports, even tax filings. The motel always came up clean. He drove out there one more time after that, unannounced. He said the woman smiled when she saw him, like she'd been expecting company. The man offered coffee, which Granddaddy declined. They chatted about weather, local gossip, small-town pleasantries. Nothing out of the ordinary except the faint smell of something chemical coming from behind the main building. He asked about it. The old man said it was just paint thinner, fixing up one of the rooms. Granddaddy didn't push. He told my dad later when he regretted that moment most of all. He had a gut feeling, and he ignored it. They didn't have enough for a warrant, so the investigation stalled. Granddaddy couldn't shake the thought that the old couple weren't helping the robbers at all. They were helping themselves. But until he could figure out how, his hands were tied. He'd been in this line of work long enough to know evil didn't always wear a scowl or carry a gun. Sometimes it smiled and poured you coffee in a roadside motel. And that was the last time he ever saw the Yellow Rose. They were going to enlist the help of a third ranger, one the old couple hadn't met yet, and they were going to send him in undercover, posing as a small-time crook looking to buy their help. The plan was simple enough. He'd drive up looking rough, tell them he'd just robbed a place, flash a roll of bills, and see if they'd offer him a deal. My granddaddy and his partner picked a guy named Wallace for the job, a tall, quiet sort who could pass for an outlaw if he needed to. They'd seen him play that part before. He rolled up to the Yellow Rose around 3 in the afternoon, dust trailing behind his old Ford. From their spot on the water tower about a half-mile out, my granddaddy and his partner watched through binoculars. Wallace got out, walked straight to the office, and the old man met him at the door. The woman came out too, smiling polite like she always did. They talked for a minute, then all three of them went inside. A couple minutes later, Wallace came back out, adjusting his hat, heading toward his car. He gave the smallest nod toward the tower signal that he'd got what he came for. When he met up with Grandaddy later that night, he said they'd offered him a deal plain as day. Told him if he ever showed up with heat on him and a few $100 cash, they could make him vanish south of the border, no questions asked. Said they had a way of moving folks where the law don't bother looking. It was enough to move forward, but Grandaddy wanted it airtight. So the next morning, Wallace went back with a story about a job gone wrong and the sheriff being after him. He took a suitcase full of marked bills, a borrowed revolver, and a phony newspaper clipping about a robbery in Clovis. From the tower, Grandaddy and his partner waited again. Wallace walked into the motel around noon. 30 minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. My Grandaddy started getting that feeling in his chest, the one he said he always got when something was about to go bad. His partner radioed in twice, no response. The car was still parked out front, but no sign of Wallace. Grandaddy decided to move. They drove up quiet, parked behind the tree line, and walked in slow with their revolvers drawn. The front desk was empty, Belle still sitting there on the counter. No sound except the clock ticking on the wall. They called out for him. Nothing. The rooms were neat, beds made, curtains drawn. No one around. It was like the place was waiting for them. They called it in right then. Within hours, the whole area was swarming. Rangers, local deputies, even a couple federal men from planes who'd driven up after hearing a ranger might have gone missing. They searched the main building, the storage shed, the well, even the septic out back. Nothing. But it was the dogs that found something. They were sniffing near the shed when one started pawing at a patch of dirt behind it. When the men started digging, they hit metal. A heavy iron hatch, half rusted over, buried just deep enough to hide. They pulled it open, and a rush of chemical fumes hit them. My Grandaddy said the smell wasn't of rot, it was too clean, too sharp, like someone trying real hard to cover something up. They sent 2 men down with lanterns. What they found under there didn't make sense at first. It was a bunker, dug out maybe 20 feet deep, lined with shelves, tables, jars and tools. The walls were whitewashed, floors concrete. But it was the smell that turned everyone cold. They followed it into another chamber, and there they found Wallace. He was laid out on a metal slab, shirt off, eyes open. Next to him were others. Men, all preserved, coated in some thick varnish that made their skin look waxy. Some of them were dressed, posed, even, sitting at tables, or propped against the wall, like some twisted display. They realized then the couple hadn't just been hiding fugitives, they'd been killing them, taking their money, then preserving them like trophies. Later, the coroner said they used embalming chemicals, the kind used in funeral homes, to keep the bodies from decaying. When the rangers pulled the couple in, the man broke almost immediately. Said they only killed bad men, that they were helping the world clean itself. The wife didn't say much, just sat there, staring at the table. Before they could even get her arraigned, she passed in her cell. Cancer, the doctor said. The old man never made it to trial, either heart attack, 2 days later. My Grandaddy said he never once believed that was justice. He said when he thought of that motel, he didn't see the killers. He saw the people buried in that bunker. Men who thought they had found a safe haven and instead walked into their own graves. For years afterward, he'd still wake up in the middle of the night, certain he could smell that same chemical burn, the smell of the yellow rose.